In this video, I'm going to show you every shortcut you need to know in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Every shortcut you see today will require at least a little bit of skill and is important to know for online play. What you aren't going to see are easy shortcuts that were obviously intended by Nintendo, and expert shortcuts that you realistically have no reason to take online. With that said, without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. Starting the show, we have a plethora of shortcuts to showcase on Mario Kart Stadium. First and foremost, you can take the beginning shortcut Shroomless by drifting into the off-road and releasing a super mini turbo in the grass. Following that is the Shroomless ramp shortcut, which you can perform by releasing a mini turbo at the edge of the off-road and do a trick off the ramp. Right after is another Shroomless shortcut, which involves hopping through this set of off-road to save a bit more time. But those three shortcuts pale in comparison to the two ending shortcuts. You can take the ending shortcut Shroomless by releasing an ultra mini turbo off the glider, then holding back and a little to the left as you glide over the shortcut and land in front of the finish line. But even that shortcut pales in comparison to the motion glider variant, which involves using 3 mushrooms one after another and combining your stick and motion inputs to close the show insanely fast. This is one of the most important shortcuts in the game. Our next track is Thwomp Ruins with only one notable shortcut. You can take the beginning shortcut Shroomless by releasing a super mini turbo in the off-road, then tricking off the ramp. Toad Harbor kind of has 2 shortcuts worth mentioning. Right out of the gate, you can take the beginning shortcut Shroomless by releasing either a regular or super mini turbo at the edge of the road. Now, you may not think this next shortcut is an actual shortcut, but it is at least a technique worth mentioning as it's very fast. If you're on the right pace, you can perform a mini turbo trick off the tram to save a ridiculous amount of time. This shortcut is always worth going for if you're on the right pace. Next up is the ending shortcut on Shy Guy Falls, which has 2 methods. The easiest method is diving down to the bottom path, so you have a lot of time to charge up a super mini turbo before hopping into the shortcut, making the shortcut very easy. You can also pull it off by taking the faster top path and briefly entering the shortcut before releasing your mini turbo into a trick off the ramp. This method, while a bit faster, is a bit more risky. And now we have the return of the motion glider on Dolphin Shoals. It's the exact same concept as on Mario Kart Stadium. Drift off the glider ramp, use 3 mushrooms, and combine your stick and motion inputs to go ridiculously fast. However, this shortcut is a little bit harder than the one on Mario Kart Stadium. So if you want an easier method, activate Smart Steering, and it'll redirect you into a shortcut that looks a lot like the motion glider method. It's not quite as fast, but it's certainly easier. Following that, we have 2 shortcuts on Mount Wario. You can take the ramp shortcut going into section 2 without the ramp by releasing your super mini turbo at the edge of the off-road. And on section 2, you can take the snow shortcut Shroomless. This isn't the fastest path, but in an online setting, you can easily cycle through item boxes by taking this path. There aren't really any shortcuts on Cloud Top Cruise, but you can perform a super bounce by performing a mini turbo trick off the bounce pad, which is significantly faster than normally tricking off of it. And once again, not really any shortcuts on Bone Dry Dunes, but if you release your mini turbo off the glider and keep your stick in neutral position, you can take the top path, which is a little bit faster than the bottom path. And if you're playing online, you can also get an item box up here that you can't get on the bottom path, so it's very useful. Next up is Rainbow Road, and the only shortcut worth mentioning here is the path switch shortcut. This has been a staple for over 10 years. So if you haven't been pulling it off, I don't know what to tell you, dude. We have quite a few shortcuts to cover on GBA Mario Circuit. First and foremost, by releasing a super mini turbo in the off-road, you can easily take the beginning shortcut Shroomless. Soon after, not as big of a shortcut, but you can do the same thing here to save a bit more time. But don't worry, we got a fun one up next. By releasing a regular mini turbo, shrooming late in the shortcut and aiming for the glider ramp, you can then glide over to the blocks to cut off the final turn in style. But if that's not an option, that's okay. You can take the ending shortcut Shroomless by releasing your mini turbo and hopping the moment you touch the off-road. Next up is Donut Plains 3. By drifting off the inclines next to the grass, you can release your super mini turbo next to the blocks to take this shortcut Shroomless. You can also take this shortcut by entering the water early, which is the fastest way to pull it off, but it is a bit more risky, so just keep that in mind. Anyways, directly after is the turn skip shortcut. It saves a lot of time, but you do skip the item set, so just keep that in mind. Following that is the Royal Raceway ramp shortcut, which can easily be done by performing a right hop on the strip into a trick off the ramp. Just be mindful that you will skip a double box by taking the shortcut. And on DK Jungle, there aren't any notable shortcuts, but you can pull off the super bounce technique by performing a mini turbo trick on the flower pad, which saves a lot of time over normally tricking. The most notable shortcut on Sherbet Land is more like a sequence of driving than a shortcut, but I still think it's worth talking about. You want to start by taking the top path, but then going into the last turn, you want to transition into taking the bottom path. If you execute this driving sequence correctly, it's the fastest way to drive the ending sequence of this track. Next up is Music Park with a couple shortcuts. The first one is on the key section, where you want to perform a mini turbo trick off the keys to save a little bit of time. Then directly after, you want to perform a mini turbo trick off the tambourine to pull off a super bounce. And at the end of the lap, you want to do the same thing on this tambourine. Yoshi Valley is mostly a bagging track, so this shortcut really isn't all that important. But by releasing a mini turbo and hopping through the off-road exactly as I do here, you can pull off this shortcut shroomless. Moving on to TikTok Clock, you can leverage the hand placements to take this beginning shortcut on lap 1. You can also pull off this shortcut on lap 3, but only if you're on a really good pace. But at the end of the lap, you can once again use the hands to pull off a really cool ending shortcut. And the best part about this shortcut is that realistically, you can pull it off on every single lap. It's definitely more reliable on laps 1 and 3, but regardless, it's still really cool. Skipping a few tracks ahead, we have Dragon Driftway. You can pull off a massive shortcut by releasing your mini turbo and hopping over the gap. And trust me, this shortcut is much bigger than it looks. And following that is the ending shortcut on Mute City, but by releasing your mini turbo slightly before hopping into the shortcut. The timing on this one makes it a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's really easy. The most notable shortcut on SNES Rainbow Road is pretty cool. By drifting off these two ramps, you can charge up an Ultra Mini Turbo to then release into a trick off this ramp to clear the gap. Next up is Ice Ice Outpost, and we have a few shortcuts to cover here. First and foremost, you can attack this shortcut very easily, which isn't anything special, but the magic happens when you combine it with this second shortcut. By executing it all the way I am here, you'll save a ton of time over not taking either of these shortcuts. And to close off the race, you can also take this ending shortcut, but make sure you perform a right trick off the first ramp, otherwise you won't get the double trick every time. Hyrule Circuit is home to one of the best shortcuts in the game. By simultaneously releasing your mini turbo and hopping at the edge of the off-road, you can take the ending shortcut shroomless. It's generally always worth it to take this shortcut, but do be mindful that you skip the last item set in doing so, and make sure to aim more to the left on lap 3 so you don't get chomped by the plant. I bet you didn't expect to see Baby Park today, but I have to mention that you can take the two off-road shortcuts shroomless. I know it's pretty boring, but shortcuts are shortcuts. You know what isn't boring though? The Wild Woods Ultra shortcut. This is one of the hardest shortcuts in the game, but goodness me, does it save a lot of time. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on the shortcut, click the top link in the description. Following that is the Ribbon Road Double Shortcut. While this shortcut was intended by Nintendo, it can sometimes be tricky to pull off online, so it's worth showcasing this shortcut with optimal driving. I mean, hell, if you're on the right pace, you can pull off the second shortcut like this. That's pretty insane. Next up is Super Bell Subway, and this will be pretty quick. You can take the ending shortcut shroomless by releasing a Super Mini Turbo in the off-road and hopping your way out. It's not that much faster or really useful considering this is more of a bagging track, but hey, it's still here. And closing out the base game are the shortcuts on Big Blue. Starting on section 2, you can drift over this gap and dive down to save some good time. Then shortly afterwards, you can drift over this gap and dive down to save even more time. On section 3, after drifting over the first boost panel, you want to switch from the purple path to the green path, then immediately drift over the following gap to clear the turn. As you can see, Big Blue has some really cool shortcuts. Kicking off the booster course pass is the Motion Glider shortcut on Coconut Mall. By releasing a left mini turbo off the glider and holding right with both your stick and motion controls, you will save a ridiculous amount of time as you approach the end of the track. Following that is the ramp shortcut on Tokyo Blur, which you can pull off by releasing your mini turbo and hopping at the edge of the off-road into a trick off the ramp. Despite the varying routes on each lap, you can also pull off the shortcut on lap 2, but be mindful that the approach is slightly less convenient than on lap 1. Sky Garden is full of time savers. Right out of the gate, you can perform the super bounce technique on the opening leaf pad, and shortly after, you can perform another super bounce off the mushroom. Then on the later end of the track, you can release a super mini turbo in the ending shortcut and hop your way out as I do here to take that shortcut shroomless. Moving on, we have a very unique shortcut on Ninja Hideaway. By releasing your super mini turbo and sticking to the wall, you can break the cardboard piranha plant without spinning out to take this track's signature shortcut shroomless. Following that, we have a very easy shortcut on New York Minute. By releasing a regular mini turbo slightly before the off-road and hopping into the shortcut, you can save more time than what meets the eye. You can also take this shortcut on lap 3, so it's very useful. Next up is Mario Circuit 3, and I'll make this one quick. You can release a super mini turbo in this tiny patch of off-road to take the U-turn in a better line. Whichever way you put it, a shortcut is a shortcut. This next shortcut on Sydney Sprint is pretty cool though. By aiming the trick off the edge of the ramp, you can cut off the turn after the ramp, which saves some pretty good time. And that leads into one of the biggest shortcuts in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the Snowland Ultra Shortcut. By using your mushroom and hopping at the edge of the snow as I do here, you will save a ridiculous amount of time over driving around the shortcut. There's a lot to unpack on Mushroom Gorge. I mean, honestly, I'll just let the gameplay speak for itself, as this track is super bounce central. Pulling off all these super bounces will save you as much as 4 to 5 seconds, which is absolutely insane. Oh yeah, and by shrooming and performing a well-timed mini turbo hop, you can also pull off the gap jump, arguably the most well-crafted shortcut in Mario Kart history. You can take the Boo Lake signature shortcut shroomless by drifting into it and releasing your ultra mini turbo in the off-road, then hopping your way out. And not too far after, it's not really a shortcut, but by positioning yourself to the far left or right of the final straight, you can perform a low trick off the railing next to the final ramp. And this is much faster than tricking off the intended ramp. You can also take the Peach Garden's beginning shortcut shroomless by releasing your mini turbo fairly before the shortcut and hopping your way through the off-road. But be mindful, if you release your mini turbo too early, you'll lose all your speed in the off-road. Additionally, this beginning shortcut turns into an ending shortcut on lap 3, which you can also pull off shroomless the same way you do on laps 1 and 2. Following that is the infamous DK Summit double shortcut. The best way to pull off this shortcut shroomless is by drifting off the first shortcut and releasing your super mini turbo off the second shortcut. If you do it right, you should either land right before or on the boost panel. Additionally, you can take this double shortcut with a minimum of 2 mushrooms by shrooming and hopping off the first shortcut, turning on smart steering in the air, then shrooming again as you land. If you try this shortcut without smart steering, you'll either get back on track very slowly or fall off. The signature shortcut on Yoshi's Island might not be fair to interpret as a shortcut, as it's more of a secret route. By hitting the flying cloud box, you'll open up a secret path that allows you to take the ending shortcut shroomless. This is obviously much faster than taking the normal route on the final turn. Skipping a few tracks forward, we have the Waluigi Stadium signature shortcut. By drifting off the boost ramp and releasing an ultra mini turbo next to the mud, you can take this shortcut shroomless. This isn't the only way to pull it off, but it's definitely the most reliable. Next up, we got 2 notable shortcuts on Athens Dash. The first one is on lap 1, very much like the beginning shortcut on Mario Kart Stadium. By releasing a super mini turbo and hopping your way out of the off-road, you can easily pull off this shortcut shroomless. And at the beginning of section 2, you can take the first turn super tight, drift off the peak of the bushes, and release a super mini turbo as you land to take that shortcut shroomless as well. The most notable shortcut on Squeaky Clean Sprint is pretty awesome. By aiming to the left of the shortcut in the drain, you can drift off the incline and the gear next to the ring to take this shortcut shroomless. I should also add that it's super satisfying to pull off online. Next up, we got LA Laps, which has a pretty cool ending shortcut. Instead of just shrooming through it, you can actually drive up a tiny incline to take this shortcut shroomless, which saves some decent time over driving around the shortcut. Sunset Wilds has 2 notable shortcuts, the first one being pretty unique. You can drift on this very narrow road to cut inside the mud to your right, which is pretty cool. And shortly after, by releasing a super mini turbo in this set of off-road and ideally clipping the block, you can also take this shortcut shroomless. Following that are 2 small shortcuts on Koopa Cape. The first one is at the beginning of the water stream section, where you can release a super mini turbo over this tiny patch of grass to save a bit of time over taking the turn normally. And this next one isn't really a shortcut, but it's faster to drift through the current that realistically should make you fall off unless you use a mushroom like it does in Mario Kart Wii. But either way, a shortcut is a shortcut. Kicking off the final wave of tracks, we have the Romavanti ending shortcut. By releasing a super mini turbo, hopping into the shortcut, and ideally clipping the wall, you can take this shortcut shroomless and save some good time over going around the shortcut. You can also pull off the shortcut on lap 3, which is definitely where the shortcut shines the most. Following that are two awesome shortcuts on DK Mountain. There are several ways to approach this first shortcut, but the main idea is that you can trick off the last of those 3 ramps to land on top of the rock wall, saving some good time over taking the normal route. And of course, there's the ending shortcut, where you want to perform a left drift over the gap and release an ultra mini turbo after the turn. This shortcut feels very satisfying to pull off. And now we have Piranha Plant Cove, a track flooded with underwater shortcuts. The first one kicks off as you're about to re-enter the water. The main idea here is you can drift off this underwater thingy to take this shortcut shroomless. And following that is this track's signature shortcut. There is simply way too much to unpack regarding the execution of this shortcut relative to the pace of this video, so I'm just going to let the gameplay speak for itself. If you want to see a more in-depth tutorial on the shortcut, click the second link in the description. But as you can see, this shortcut is absolutely insane and saves a lot of time. Next up is the lap 2 underwater shortcut. It's best to perform this shortcut by tricking off the first ramp and drifting off the following ramp. In doing so, you can narrowly cut off the following turn and save some good time. But do keep in mind that this shortcut does skip the last item set on lap 2. And finally, there's the ending shortcut, which is pretty easy. Simply release your mini turbo fairly early and hop your way through the off-road to make it to the finish line faster than you would by driving around the shortcut. Kicking off the final cup is the Madrid Drive beginning shortcut, which you can pull off shroomless by releasing your mini turbo early and hopping through the shortcut as fast as you can. I should mention that the grass here is very unforgiving, so you want to get out of there as fast as possible, more so than any other shortcut mentioned today. Following that are 2 shortcuts on Rosalina's Ice World. The first one is a lot like the one on Sherbet Land, where you want to start by landing on the top path and drifting into the bottom path. If you drive it correctly like I do here, this is the fastest sequence of driving on this split path. And the second shortcut isn't really that important, but it's faster to take the ending shortcut shroomless by releasing a super mini turbo in the snow and hopping your way into a trick off the final ramp. Last but not least, we have Wii Rainbow Road, where we have 2 notable shortcuts. The first one is after the 2 half pipes, where you can hop over the gap to save some solid time over driving normally. And finally, there's the fast half pipe shortcut, which involves going off the half pipe as tight as possible and getting the boost as you land. This shortcut is a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy and very satisfying to pull off. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you'd leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments which of these shortcuts is your favorite, and if there were any shortcuts you either didn't know or didn't realize were that important. I mean, there were definitely some shortcuts that barely made this list. But hey, like I said, a shortcut is a shortcut. With that said, until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day and keep on giving her, bud.